If you are young and you want to build a property portfolio and you are sick of watching prices move while you sit on the sidelines trying to save a deposit for a home you actually want to live in, then this video is for you. Because I want to show you how renting can actually be the vehicle that gets you to financial freedom faster than buying your dream home ever would. And before you close the video because that sounds backwards, stay with me. Because this is one of those ideas that completely changes how you see the market once you actually run the numbers. And most people never run the numbers, they just follow the script that they were handed. If you're wondering who I am, my name is Richard Morgan. I've built a property portfolio worth tens of millions, achieved financial freedom, and have been a mortgage broker for 8 years. So let's start with the thing everyone says. Renting is dead money. You've heard it before, your parents have said it. That uncle who thinks he knows everything about property has definitely said it. And look, I'm not going to tell you that that is completely wrong. But I am going to tell you that it is almost never the full picture. And the part that gets left out is what actually matters. Because here is what dead money actually looks like. Renting and spending everything else on lifestyle. Going out, buying things that you do not need, not investing a single dollar of the difference. If that is you, then yes, renting is dead money. This strategy is not for you, and that's fine. But if you are someone who is genuinely trying to build something, who understands that the point of renting cheaper than you could own is to redirect that capital into assets that grow, then what we're about to get into could completely change your trajectory. Here is something that does not get said enough. Most of the property decisions people make are not financial decisions. They're emotional ones. They buy because their parents expect it, because their partner wants the security of it, because it feels like the grown-up thing to do, because that uncle at Christmas dinner would ask too many questions if they didn't. And I get it. It's the great Australian dream. It's deeply embedded. Owning your own home feels like proof that you've made it, that you're doing the right thing, that you're responsible. But when you strip away all that social pressure and you actually run the numbers, the picture looks very different for a lot of people, particularly younger people who have not yet locked in where they want to live, what they want to do, or how their career is going to play out. The mistake is confusing emotional comfort with financial strategy. They are not the same thing, and conflating the two is what keeps a lot of people stuck. Let's talk about the buy to live trap, because it is real and it catches a lot of people who are genuinely thinking they're doing the smart thing. Going all in on an owner-occupier feels right. It's what your parents did, and it's what society tells you to do. But what it often does in practice is it locks you into a framework that keeps you from building real wealth. You end up with a large chunk of non-deductible debt. Nobody is paying that mortgage except you. If your income drops, if circumstances change, if a job disappears, that debt does not care. It is still there every month. And beyond the risk, there is the opportunity cost. When your borrowing capacity and your savings are consumed by an owner-occupier, investing is essentially off the table for years, sometimes a decade. The whole time the market is moving and you are standing still because everything that you have is tied to one asset that you are living in and slowly paying down. There is also the flexibility cost that people often ignore. When you are younger, life moves fast. Jobs change, relationships change. The suburb you loved at 28 is not necessarily where you want to be at 35. With a rental, you can move with minimal cost. With an owner-occupier, you're paying stamp duty to get in, agent fees to get out, and you are potentially selling at the wrong point of the cycle because life circumstances may have forced your hand. Those transaction costs alone can wipe out years of growth. Now I want to be clear because this is not a blanket argument against ever buying a home to live in. There are situations where it absolutely makes sense, and I want to be honest about that. If you're a high income earner or a high income couple and you can see your earnings trajectory clearly, buying an owner occupier can work as a stepping stone. You buy, you sit on the growth, and eventually you use the equity along with your increased borrowing capacity to pivot into investments. That path works when the income is there to service the debt comfortably and you have a clear plan for what comes next. There is also a strategy worth knowing about where you could buy your owner-occupier with the long-term intention of converting it into an investment. You buy something more modest than a dream home, something that actually fits the criteria of a good investment property in terms of location and fundamentals. You live in it for a period of time, and then when you're ready to upgrade or shift to rentvesting, you convert it to an investment. The finance structure from day one needs to be set up correctly for this to work properly, so it's not a decision to make without the right advice. But it is a legitimate path that sits somewhere between the two options. And there is a little known capital gains tax angle in there as well. So when you make that transition, it's worth understanding. But that is a deeper conversation for another video. So you are in a position to invest right now. You've been sitting on the sidelines and you want someone to actually help you look at your options, whether that's your first property or your next one. There is a link below. You can book a call with myself or my team. In that conversation, we'll look at your numbers and your personal situation together. And you will be speaking with a team who invests themselves and stays at the forefront of what is actually happening in the lending environment today. Now that you understand what is actually driving these decisions and what the owner-occupier path is really costing you, the question becomes, what does the alternative actually look like in practice? Not in theory, in real numbers. And that's where taking action comes in. Let me give you a real world example because I think this is where rent vesting stops being a concept and starts being something you can actually see. We rented an apartment in Darling Point. The apartment directly below ours sold for $4.2 million. Ours needed a lot of work, so let's call it worth $3.5 million. The rent that we were paying was roughly $1,200 a week. That is $62,400 a year. For the owner of that property, that is a gross yield of about 1.8% before even accounting for strata fees and any land tax. 1.8% on $3.5 million of capital. Now here's where it gets interesting. Instead of buying that Darling Point apartment for $3.5 million, what if that same capital went into the Brisbane property market in 2020? Over the period from 2020 to 2025, the compound annual growth rate in Darling Point apartments was -2%, flat, no growth. Meanwhile, Brisbane over that same period grew at a compound annual growth rate of 12.6%. That $3.5 million invested in Brisbane would have become $6.34 million in 5 years. Now am I cherry picking data for the sake of a conversation? Not really. I could have used Perth as a comparison and the result would have been even more dramatic. But this is a genuine real world example of what rent investing can look like when you separate the decision of where you live from the decision of where you invest. The way that many people think about this is backwards. They compare the rent that they pay to the mortgage repayment, and they say the mortgage is building equity, so it must be better. But that's not the right comparison. The real cost of an owner-occupier is not the repayment, it is the interest. It's the actual cost of holding the asset. The principal component is equity you're building, but the interest is gone. It is the cost of borrowing. So when you're comparing renting to owning, the honest comparison is your rent versus the interest proportion of the mortgage repayment. And when you run that number on a comparable property in a premium Sydney suburb, renting is almost always significantly cheaper. The difference in weekly outgoings between renting where you want to live and owning, it goes somewhere. And in a rent vesting strategy, it goes into assets. It funds deposits, it services investment loans, it does productive work rather than going to just covering the cost of keeping a roof over your head. Here is the part that most people miss entirely when they think about this strategy. It's not just about the capital growth that compounds. The rental income compounds too. Going back to that Brisbane example, between 2020 and 2025, the compound annual growth rate of the rental income in Brisbane was 10.5%. Average rents went from $410 a week to $690 a week. Now with that $3.5 million you spent, you have 6 investment properties in Brisbane over that period of time. Your rental income would have gone from $2,460 a week to $4,140 a week. That is an increase of $1,680 a week in rental income alone. And that Darling Point apartment, rent barely moved $200 a week over the same period to $1,500 a week. So here's what that actually means. Those Brisbane investments have now grown to the point where the rental income they generate can cover your rent. That is the moment where rent vesting stops being a strategy and starts being freedom. The assets are paying for your lifestyle while you keep the equity and the growth. Now yes, that period was exceptional, but the principle holds across any meaningful period of time. Rental income compounds, capital grows, and the person who started earlier with a portfolio of investment properties in the right locations end up with a fundamentally different position to the person who put everything in one home and lived there for 20 years. Now that you can see what this looks like in real numbers, the final piece is how you actually structure it. Because knowing how rent vesting works is one thing, setting it up in a way that lets you scale is something else entirely. And that's where leverage comes in. Here is a way of thinking about deposits that most people have never considered. A deposit sitting in an owner-occupier is doing one job. It's reducing one loan on one asset, and that's it. The same capital deployed differently could be funding deposits across multiple investment properties, each one with its own growth trajectory, each one building equity, each one generates rental income, and because you're using leverage, you are getting exposure to the full growth of each asset, not just the portion you put in. $3.5 million of property in a market growing 12% a year looks very different in 10 years to $3.5 million in a market that went sideways. And the person who understood that distinction and had the flexibility to act on it because they were not locked into owner-occupier debt is the one who ends up in a completely different financial position. So what does this look like in practice? The simplest version is this. You rent in the area you want to live. You choose that based on lifestyle, proximity to work, where your friends are, whatever matters to you. And you invest where the numbers make sense. You choose that based on data, growth fundamentals, supply and demand dynamics, yield relative to price. Not because you would want to live there, but because the asset will perform. The mistake a lot of people make with this is only looking at investment opportunities in places that they're familiar with or where they would want to live. That is an emotional filter, not a financial decision. The best investment you can make might be in a city that you've never spent a weekend in. And that's fine. You're not buying a holiday, you're buying an asset. And diversification matters here too. If you're building a portfolio of multiple properties, concentrating them all in one location adds risk. Different markets move at different times. Having exposure across markets means that your portfolio is not entirely dependent on one cycle in one city. Look, this strategy only works if the structure is right. And that is where having the right people around you makes a difference. Not just a broker who can get a loan approved, but one that actually invests themselves and structures things from day one so that your next move is always available to you. That is what my team and I do at Freedom Funding. Link is below. Come and have a conversation about what your options actually look like from here. The last thing I want to address is the thing that actually stops most people from going down this path. It's not about money, it's not about borrowing capacity, it's about what other people think. Because rentvesting does not look impressive at a dinner party. You can't show people through your home. Your parents might not understand it. Your friends who bought early might question it. And that social discomfort is real. I know because I've lived through that. But here's the thing that I've had to get comfortable with over the years. What other people think of your financial strategy is genuinely none of your business. If someone's flex is a larger owner-occupied mortgage, while you're quietly building a portfolio of investments in markets that are outperforming, let them have it. Run your own race. Follow the numbers, be consistent, make good decisions, and let the results speak for themselves in 10 years. There is a reason people who build serious wealth through property often look like they're not doing much. The work is happening in the background, in the compounding, in the rental income that quietly grows year after year, in the equity that accumulates while they're living exactly how they want to live without being a slave to a mortgage on a home that they're stretched to buy to impress people that they don't even particularly like. Stick to the fundamentals. Property is a long-term gain. It rewards patience, good structure, and time in the market, not timing the market. Not buying the most impressive home you can get approved for. Time in the market. And rentvesting, when done properly, is one of the most effective ways to maximize that time. And with that being said, thank you for watching. Please, if you found this video helpful, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.